Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to March Mystery Madness, big BookTube event in its 8th year where we read and discuss murder mysteries of all kinds. I love murder mysteries. I read them all year long, but I save a bunch of them for March, and I also save some of my deeper thinking about them, what they are, why we like them, and how they work for March, especially since the last few years, March has been a prelude to April, which is Camp NaNoWriMo, a NaNoWriMo spin-off event in which you are encouraged to join tens of thousands of other people in writing fiction. In the case of Camp NaNoWriMo in April and in July, it can be anything. It doesn't have to be fiction, but I think most people still stick to fiction. And it also doesn't have to be original, and it doesn't have to be 50,000 words, but I think most people stick to those anyway. It's kind of fun when you know that you've got all those other people engaged in it with you. It doesn't feel quite so isolated. I am certainly going to write something for Camp NaNoWriMo, and I've been thinking for the whole of the month of March that it would be a murder mystery. Why not, right? Why not use March Mystery Madness to put some fuel to that fire? And I've been wondering about it because I think I might be grappling with it on a technical level, and I need to know by today. I need to figure out what I'm going to write for Camp NaNoWriMo today or tomorrow if I'm going to put any kind of work into making it happen on the month itself. But the more I've been thinking about it, the more I've been wondering, as I've mentioned on this channel, about the confluence between who's doing the detecting and who has the authority to punish the wrongdoer, and where they feed off each other. Is it in strict police procedurals? It's the same people who are doing that, and in the very strictest of police procedurals, there is no detection. It is assumed that the sort of platonic ideal of law enforcement will find the guilty person anyway. That you don't need some amateur to come in and solve things by looking at clues in hampers. That instead, if you just let the police do their work, there won't be any human bias involved, and there won't be any error. It'll just be they will eventually get to the guilty person. You have that, and then on the opposite end of the spectrum, you have the pure amateur sleuth, where the police are barely involved at all until the end. They're going to show up to haul the person off, but it's going to be the amateur who figures things out, everything out, without any help from the police at all. And then you have everything in between. And I'm trying to think of these as vectors rather than poles, but it's definitely governing a lot of the mystery reading that I'm doing. And I started off March Mystery Madness. I sort of fell into a rut of reading a lot of books that are entirely about policemen, entirely about cops doing their jobs. And that started to leave a bad taste in my mouth for a bunch of self-evident reasons. So I started to move away from that to people who aren't involved with cops at all until the end, when the guilty have to be apprehended. And then I've sort of been wandering. A little closer and closer to that old police model where the police are more and more central. I can't help but think that a part of why police have become more and more central to that kind of narrative is because police departments, especially in the United States, have become much more powerful, much more all-encompassing, where now it really does feel like if you were a talented amateur who was trying to sleuth your way to the bottom of a crime, you'd be guilty of a crime yourself. The police would be as interested in you as they are in finding the murderer. It increasingly feels that way as we are now firmly planted in the 21st century, where in America anyway, which is the huge market for murder mysteries, in America, if you live in a town or a city of over, let's say, 20,000 people, it's entirely likely that your police department has a tank. They find stray dogs. They break up domestic disputes with people throwing pasta at each other. They guide funerals. They guide funeral processions and whatnot. They have a detached member standing there to help with construction work on the street. There are parks. There are little leagues. There are hotly contested rivalries between little league teams. There is, in other words, not the shadow of a vestige of a justification for your police department to have armor-piercing weapons, body armor, night vision goggles, or a tank. And yet, in America, it's unbelievably likely that your police department has those things. Knowing that makes police procedural or police-centric books a little bit harder to swallow. But for the book that I read last night, I went farther afield, but not from police detective work, really, but rather from the coast of Massachusetts. Because yesterday we talked about A Beautiful Place to Die, which is the first book in a series of murder mysteries set on the island of Martha's Vineyard off the coast of Massachusetts, which is it's a big, beautiful place. You can see Cape Cod from Martha's Vineyard on a good day, and it's become a vacation resort for the hyper-wealthy. It is still a wonderful place. Still plenty of ordinary people live there. They have a great newspaper, the Martha's Vineyard Gazette, which features strongly in A Beautiful Place to Die. I write book reviews for the Martha's Vineyard Gazette, so that got an extra nod from me. But I decided for my next murder mystery to go farther afield, to go out one island from Martha's Vineyard to Nantucket, the island of Nantucket, also off the coast of Massachusetts, but a more significant distance away. And until the 21st century, more remote in every way. In the 20th century, if you were going to fly out to Nantucket and stay there at a friend's house or whatever, if you knew somebody who was living there, if you were intent on wintering on the island, staying over the winter on Nantucket, you had better be prepared, because there were not many in the way of modern amenities like there were on the vineyard, even at the same time, or on the Cape. I went to a murder mystery that I read back in the 1970s. It won an Edgar Award, and it came to my attention. I don't know if that's how. Once upon a time, there was a mystery magazine that paid a lot of nonfiction attention to the industry, what was winning things, gave lots and lots of good reviews. I'm blanking right now on the name of that magazine. I don't think it was any of the murder mystery magazines. I don't think it was Ellery Queen. Might have been Ellery Queen back in the good old days. But I read a review of the book. Classic thing. I read a review of the book that made it sound intriguing, so I went and found it. And it's this. It's by Roy Windsor, he of soap opera fame. And it's called The Corpse That Walked, with this gorgeous old cover from the 1970s. There you have an old wicker hamper with the enamel whale there, and a gun, and the seashells on a sand dune. Just wonderful. Not representative of the action in the book, but just a beautiful piece of cover art. I can't praise this kind of period cover art enough. It doesn't happen anymore. So it's a lost art. I don't think there are as many books commemorating all of this stuff as there should be. There are a lot of books on lurid covers from the 1970s. But what about just lovely ones? I see these all the time on murder mystery covers and westerns, especially. I guess if I'm praising it, I should find out if they almost certainly won't credit the artist. They almost never do. This does not credit the artist. But this is the story of a young man who's just finished his PhD, and he is flying to Nantucket to visit an erstwhile professor of his, Ira Cobb, who lives on Nantucket, and they in the intervening years they have become sort of friends. Their mentor-student relationship has blossomed into a kind of friendship. And the main character is just going out. I once again forget his name. Also because he is a cipher. He's a non-entity. Barnes, I think, is his last name. Let's see here. Well, Barnes is his last name. I don't remember his first name. I guess it doesn't really matter, because he's only in this book as a convenient place for Ira Cobb to dump exposition. He is basically Watson, but not the real Watson, not John Watson from Arthur Conan Doyle's stories, who often gets short shrift, but is not adult at all, by any means. No matter what Holmes says about him, he's not adult in those stories. Rather, it's Nigel Bruce, that Watson, the bumbling oaf who is the sidekick of Basil Rathbone's Sherlock Holmes in the once famous black and white movies. Nigel Bruce's Watson is a good-natured but bumbling dimwit who needs everything explained to him, and that is the perfect mechanism by which the hero of the show can just keep explaining things, where otherwise that would be harder to orchestrate. He gets to Ira Cobb's house, and Ira Cobb reveals that he has been leading a double life as a best-selling author, and also that he is regularly consulted by the Nantucket Police Department when they have a real poser of a crime. So suddenly Barnes is caught up in all of this, where he wasn't expecting to be. He was just expecting a vacation. And there is a corker of a crime in this book. This is very atmospheric to Nantucket. Little roads, peat bogs, thick fog, that sort of thing. And also colorful locals. Lots and lots of colorful locals. The whole thing is jammed to the rafters with colorful locals, which is a way to date this on its own. In the 70s, the hyper-commercialization of the vineyard and also Nantucket had only really just begun. in the 70s, it was still possible to be a colorful yokel and just make your business in the season when tourists come and be able to live on the island and go fishing and whatnot. It's less and less. I'd be willing to bet there aren't many colorful locals left who actually live and work like a normal person on Nantucket. I could be wrong about that. Certainly, the headlines are stolen by the mega rich who go there to vacation. There are a ton of colorful locals in this book, and they're all involved in one way or another in the incident at the heart of the book, which is a car that goes off the road, slams into a tree, and there's a dead body. But the coroner is 100% certain that the driver of the car, the dead body, died upon impact with the tree. And yet, the body appeared to get up and walk. It was found half submerged in a pond. And that is the whole point of the title here, and that is the whole point of the mystery. What actually happened on the night in question? Someone had to have come across that wreck and run the risk of taking the body out of the car and half submerging it in a nearby pond. And who would that somebody be, and what would their motive be? They'd be leaving copious forensic evidence behind. Was the person who was driving the car still alive? Were they maybe half out of the car? Were they moving on their own despite their grievous injuries? Is it possible, in other words, that the forensic examiner is wrong? And if the forensic examiner is right and somebody had to move the body, well, as you're going to be able to know from these grand old mysteries, this thing is wonderfully done. But you're going to be able to know right away, without me telling you, that as the novel progresses, one after another person turns out to have been directly in that area, in that hairpin turn, on that foggy night. One after another person seems to have been there. So that the number of suspects, the possible motives, just keeps growing and growing. Now, the mechanics involved here are a lot the same. The chief of police for the area very much values Cobb's opinion, wants his opinion, lets him basically direct the investigation. So Cobb doesn't have any coercive power on his own. As he tells one reluctant witness, he says, they're talking, and Cobb is a ruthless investigator. He's a ruthless questioner. He sees right through people. And he tells this guy, who is a colorful yokel, a colorful local on his own, tells him, it would be much, much better for you to confess to me than to get involved with the police. The unspoken part of that being, if you confess to me, I will help you with the police. That witness doesn't take him up on that offer, neither does anybody else. He makes that point to half a dozen people in the course of this book, that it'd really be better, it'd be more worth your time to talk to me than to just hold out and talk to the police. I can figure out what's going on here. They're relying on me. It's through Barnes that we get both all of the exposition dumps that we get, because Barnes is forever coming up with impulsive possible explanations. Oh, that's the one. He did it. Reminded me. It always does remind me. It's supposed to remind me of Murder on the Orient Express. If you know that story, or if you know the famous movie with Albert Finney as Hercule Poirot and his little grey cells, if you know that story, then you know that every time they question a witness, there are a whole bunch of witnesses to the murder, a whole bunch of people involved with the dead man, and every time they question each one of them individually, and every time they do, once the person leaves the room, Poirot's impressionable assistant says, "That's the guy. That's the one who did it. That's our murderer." You feel the same thing here, because Barnes is forever doing that. The story gets more and more complicated, but Cobb is a straight line. He is indefatigable and very clear-sighted. You can see early on in the book why the police would rely on him. But in addition to the expedition dumps, Barnes is also the place where we get another element that we saw yesterday, which is local flavor. The book is absolutely full of food. Oh my God. Oh my God. Virtually every page, people are pigging out on food. That is clearly meant to do something. It's clearly meant to convey the atmosphere of a place. Same thing with the sea air and the sound of the breakers and the tiny claustrophobic nature of these little villages. Characters in the course of this book make mention of tourists, but we barely see anyone in the course of this book who really qualifies as a tourist. There are visitors to the island who have nefarious purposes involved. They are foremost in Cobb's attention, but right now, today, people who live on Nantucket are accustomed to the tides, and when they talk about the tides, they're not talking about the ocean. They're talking about the tides of tourists who come in and go out. They come in at the beginning of summer. Suddenly, there are lines at every store. Suddenly, there are lines at every bank machine, or before there were ATMs at every bank. Suddenly, there are lines and crowds at every beach. Every old cottage is being photographed. Every staple of existence, from toilet paper to lemonade, is sold out wherever you can go. People who live year-round on Nantucket have to deal with that particular tide. That tide almost doesn't appear in here. Like I said, the 70s is when that was starting. And I liked this book. I liked it very much. It was really a cure for what ails me in terms of March Mystery Madness, except that sooner or later you get to a point where you are wondering about those two convections, those two lines of narrative, those two poles of any murder mystery. Because no matter how much Cobb figures out, sooner or later he's going to need to either have or invoke the coercive powers of the police. Sooner or later that is going to happen. And if it weren't for the police, Cobb would have no knowledge of the forensics report. If it weren't for the police, Cobb would have no knowledge of the crime except what he heard in village gossip. He wouldn't know anything about a person heard whistling a particular song. He wouldn't know anything about the scandalous affairs of the linking three of the suspects. He learns all of that basically from the police, what he doesn't learn from the mouths of the suspects themselves. So this really helped. I think I want to go. This was much farther afield from just straight up police procedural. The police don't really contribute anything to the mystery here. It's Cobb and a little bit Barnes who figure it all out. But even so, they're present. I guess they can't be avoided. But I think I'm going to try a little harder. I'm going to stay far away from direct participation with the police as I can for tonight's murder mystery. Don't know what it will be, but I'll pick it and talk about it tomorrow. And I can't go further out because further out from Nantucket is Europe, so I can't do that. So I think I'll probably move away from New England completely. But anyway, that is our book for today, The Corpse That Walked. No idea if this has ever been reprinted. I would think that since it won an Edgar Award, which is one of the highest awards that the mystery world has to bestow, I would think that it would have been reprinted. I guarantee you, though, it won't be reprinted with this gorgeous cover art. No way. How lovely. How utterly lovely. So I read this when it first came out. I got it in a hardcover from, I think I bought it as a hardcover at Crocs and Brentanos. I think I did. Got rid of it long since in a move or, torn apart by beagles or whatever. And I found this mass market at the Brattle Bookshop here in Boston just a year ago or two. And sort of stowed it away, thinking, March Mystery Madness will come around and I will want to read it. So it technically counts for the repeat part of Lather, Rinse, Repeat. And so will tomorrow's. Whatever it is, so will tomorrow's. So I will pick a book tonight. I'll read it. I will reconvene then. Thank you, BookTube.